Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International here, and after a quick reset on Temple of Sethralus, we will be going into that remake, so both teams will have another opportunity to restart the dungeon and go back head-to-head. I'm Jack, and joining me on the desk right now is Sloot, Zyronic, and Sours here. And as we were looking at the first run that we had, the preliminary run there, Sours, it seemed like they just had a bit of a mistake on the side of Abrakeydabra at that very first pull. It just kind of got caught off balance.
Yeah, Abrakeydabra was really thrown out of their stride at the beginning of the dungeon. It's happened to them on several occasions, in several dungeons, unfortunately, and it just happened to happen at the very beginning of this one. And Fourty was able to capitalize on it, and they were executing their strategy very cleanly, going through the dungeon very well. But besides the time where Lizelle got JB by the second boss and got killed when he went under the water, he was trying to milk a little bit of damage with Karma, but, you know, these things happen.
Things happen, and then we'll be looking at the reset as we go into this Temple of Sethralus between Fourty and Abrakeydabra.
Zyro, I have a pretty good idea of what's about to happen in terms of strategies in this stuff.
Yeah, I predict that we're going to see some Whack-A-Rat again. No, hopefully they'll be able to pull that, make this pull work. Both times we've seen them do this Temple of Sethralus strat on the side of Abrakeydabra, they've had some problems with it. They've had a few deaths. It's been a little weird from them, so we'll have to see if they can clean it up here. Yeah. But we do see the same pull from both teams here.
No, you're absolutely right, but there is a lot of residual damage that comes out of this pack, especially with the Stone Fist slamming the ground, and you have the power shots. Now, some of it is avoidable. You want to be quick to dispel a lot of the poisons that go out too, but the power shots are something that you particularly have to watch out for, and the only way you know which direction they're pointing in is to see the character's model. But with the mess of stuff that is going on there, it can easily get clipped by it. Now, power shot will do an immense amount of damage and split damage for every member hit. So if you see it, if you don't see it by accident, you're the only one that gets hits by it, then, I mean, that's it. You're going to die, as we saw Ulcerat do in the last map.
Yeah, and it looks like they're actually dealing with it a lot more clean. But the thing to mention is that I don't really know if this pull is the best possible pull, because they do have to commit their bloodlust to this, and they're also getting a less percentage than Fourty is getting from their first pull. So, I mean, it's questionable whether or not that's the right pull. It definitely worked out better for them this time. They have no deaths on the board, so we'll have to see if just getting that extra dungeon pull of practice is going to work out for them here.
I mean, Zyra, you know, I know you've had struggles throughout education in your life, but 14 is actually equal to 14, not less than 14. But, you know, we'll learn about it in the future. NA math, indeed. 40K now busting out the same pull with the double Stone Fist that we saw. Actually, almost close to a wipe last time. We did see Rentari go down, so Tree of Life has been popped up by by Igloo to heal up Rentari with the dangerous damage coming in from the double Stone Fist. Whilst, just as we saw in the previous attempt, Abrakeydabra has started up on Adderus and Aspix.
And of course, they've already gone through the most important part of the fight, as we saw there from that first section of Adderus and Aspix. That's that Cyclone Strike plus the Static Shot going off at the same time. If you get hit by both of those abilities, it's pretty easily one-shot damage, even in this fortified setting. Now, of course, we did mention last time, once again, they have to hit only one of the bosses because of that lightning shield.
And this time, you know, we saw the cleanup come out from Abrakeydabra with this replay, but 40K as well has cleaned up this pull particularly. No deaths, no proc on Wolf Disco on that cheat death as well once Rentari goes down. So they grab, this time they're much more aggressive. They grab their Reaping and take it right on top of the boss.
Now, last time I'm pretty sure they didn't go right on top of the boss with the Reaping because they still had a Crowless Pup alive, and if they did kill that Crowless Pup on top of the boss, that would have bolstered both of the bosses by, once again, 20% health and 20% damage. But this time they were able to cleave everything down efficiently and at the same time, so they were able to pull all of the Reaping into the boss, which is the far more efficient thing to do.
I mean, 40K was well ahead in the previous dungeon, and even they are improving their own strategies and their own progression through the dungeon compared to the pre-remake dungeon that we had. Abrakeydabra here just now killing Adderus as they remain with Aspix, patiently waiting until that lightning shield falls off before engaging with the boss and spreading out here for that quaking hit. Adderus 42% and Aspix 80% for 40K on the other side of the screen, but they have, of course, dealt with their first Reaping wave efficiently and effectively on top of the boss.
Yeah, and of course we've already talked about Static Shock, the main ability, but the other main ability for Aspix in this fight is this Arc Dash ability that we see him do occasionally. He'll target the location of all 5 players in the group, dash between their locations. There's a little bit of a delay. You have about 5 seconds to move away from where he targets. So once you see that those arrows come out on the ground, the entire group can relocate away and dodge the ability completely.
Yeah, certainly a very well telegraphed spell and a lot of time and leniency for players to move from that. So you to get hit by that, I mean, you need to probably just not have your monitor on. So easy for these these players to deal with as Adderus dips down 5%, should be able to finish it off here. One last Cyclone Strike goes out as the players do well to avoid it, eating the Static Shock, and is actually well timed here for that shield to drop off. Adderus should be dead, I guess. Just a bit of an issue with the display here on the screen. Adderus is well dead, and Aspec's on the way down as well, 37%. Seeing the same pull as we saw in the previous dungeon from Abrakeydabra here, as they look to proc their first Reaping and pull it into the other side pack past the double Stonefist ones.
Yep, and we're seeing pretty much a little bit the same thing. We do see Rest Igloo going down at 20% on the boss, and they don't have a battle res available for him because he is the battle res. Fortunately, the boss is relatively low, and because he's a druid, he should be able to stealth past everything just fine. And that's good because, I mean, they'd have to otherwise res him, which can be a problem with his Quaking Affix.
I mean, they will have to res him after this. He hasn't released. Lucky for them, this occurred when Aspects was already, the only one alive, was already quite low, and the only really residual damage on the group at that point is just the Quaking. But here comes the res on Igloo. Lae'zel unfortunately needed to stop the res, just a poorly timed Quaking on their part, unlucky. So he's going to waste a few more seconds here having to res Igloo on the side, whilst the rest of the group is already moving through the Gauntlet and getting near that Crawlist Rider that patrols up and down. Abrakeydabra jumping on the opportunity here, 27% on trash, has pulled the Crawlist Rider and will be moving through the Gauntlet.
Yeah, we see that one slight difference in terms of trash percentage that these teams are doing. Abrakeydabra opting to get a little bit more trash percentage in the first room, and we're going to see where that extra trash percentage comes in on the side of Fourty. They opt to pull these first 3 snakes right at the top of the bridge here, and Abrakeydabra completely skips it entirely.
Skips it entirely. 40k now moving over to this triple sapped pack as Rentari just deals with one Quaking hit and gets ready to pull some trash on the side. The 2 marksmen, the very same ones that have the power shot, leaps down heroically into action on top of the next Crawlist Rider, whilst Abrakeydabra, we have seen the kind of pull they do, very aggressive here, grabbing the Rider off this kind of bridge patrol area and combining it with the second one, likely waiting for it to patrol near them.
Yep, and of course we did see them the same time last time pull the second Crawlist Rider again, once again doing the exact same pull. Now this is a pretty dangerous pull. There's only 4 mobs, but these Crawlist Riders do a lot of tank damage.
A lot of tank damage, and Jay gets caught in the fold with that as he procs that cheat death. Want to make sure you're dodging the Noxious Breath from the Crawlist Riders, else you will incur a pretty substantial hit, plus an 8-second damage over time poison. Turns around, Elstrat gets clipped by one of the poisons right now as the Crawlist Riders dismount. Here you have to watch out for their frontal cleave, but also be careful because of the lightning shield. Got to get that interrupt up for those electrified scales. Double interrupt comes up. Well played here by Abrakeydabra, but they have to make sure to tend to that bolstering well.
And I mean, we mentioned it last dungeon. They're pulling the exact amount of mobs that they have the CC to deal with. 4 mobs, they've got 4 melee interrupts. They all have their assigned interrupts. We're just seeing a masterful... It's a clinic on how to deal with the dungeon when you don't have all of that AoE CC available to you.
Avatar is popped here by Divine Field, getting as much Thunderclap damage in as possible. We can see that occurring every other global cooldown now for him. Abrakeydabra, 36% on trash, will be proccing their second wave of Reaping here at 40% with the downing of some of these mobs. Now, pretty dangerous pull here. Not only do they have a Rider in there, but the 3 tenders that are already pre-empowered that guard the center of Merektha's room have been pulled. 40k not to be outdone, an even bigger pull on top of that. Has grabbed the same 3 tenders, plus an incubator, plus the Crawlist Rider. So a lot of damage coming in. We could see Tree of Life popped on the side of 40k already.
Yeah, Divine Field dropping incredibly low there to that pack there, but fortunately able to be healed back to full. Just those little spikes of damage are incredibly dangerous. Now, I remember last time in this dungeon, we did see him go down and proc his trinket here. He still has that cheat death trinket available to him in this dungeon as they move into this even bigger pull in this section of the dungeon.
Yeah, fortunately, no disconnect issues this time. Shield wall comes up. We can see the rotating 3 shields around Divine Field's character. Now, of course, they've combined the remainder of the room with their 40% trash Reaping wave, the second Reaping wave, and they'll be getting ready to pull Merektha in just a moment here, looking to down everything accordingly with bolstering as 40k grabs their respective second Reaping wave, getting ready to pull the rest of the room. They still have a Rider left, though, something that Abrakeydabra has already dealt with and is a nice advantage to have overcome.
Yeah, I mean, the pulls for Abrakeydabra are definitely splitting up the difficulties in the dungeon, right? They're doing the tank, the more difficult tank pull first, and then they're doing the interrupt heavy pull second, whereas 40k is kind of opting to just kind of split it up every single time, which you kind of shift the load a little bit where everyone has to always deal with something, but on the side of Abrakeydabra, it kind of lets people take breaks on the pulls sometimes.
Breaks are important for everybody. 54% for Abrakeydabra. Just a couple of lingering mobs here, souls left over from their second Reaping wave, which should be no problem as we deal with this kind of first phase. Once again, nothing too dangerous. Just want to make sure that you're pre-moving once the splash of poison goes down. so that the model of snakes does not trap you in the poison that actually can tick quite hard. 70% for the first transition phase. We see the venomous Ophidians come out. No danger here except for on the tank, but one swift dispel once you're at 3+ stacks should be easy.
And of course, when they get into the second phase of the fight, the 70 to 40% phase, there's really not that much difficulty or danger to this part of the fight because he doesn't do that frontal breath. There's no extra void zones going on the ground, so there's really no danger in this section of the fight until we get to the second intermission.
Certainly just want to turn around during those blinding sands so you don't get disoriented for a few seconds. 40k now dealing with the final of their trash pull. Looks like that a bit of mismanagement, unfortunately, with the bolstering, which is why you can see these two mobs with a shred of health. Looks like they're not too dangerous, but they actually are. There's a ton of bolstering stacks, which is why you're seeing Rentari play so defensively, moving away from them. They just hit so hard with all those stacks of plus 20% damage. 40k at 57% trash. Merektha has finally spawned for them. Unfortunately, they have a death on the board, so that won't be working in their favor, but Dr. J gets a little smackaroo from the boss once again submerging, something that we saw on the side of 40k with Lizelle dying. So Dr. J actually did incur a death there, but fortunately had that rogue proc to back him up.
Yeah, we do see almost perfect CC on the Dust Cloud casts here, making sure they knock them away, not making sure those Dust Cloud casts don't actually get off so that they're able to efficiently DPS those sand-crusted strikers down so that they don't get their LOL zones on the ground.
I might have been smoking, actually. I thought I saw Jay's cheat death proc, but I'm just trying to kind of squint at it right now. It looks like it's actually only about a minute left on it, a minute and a half. But so my eyes played tricks on me. He did dip low from the bump there, but no death either way for Abrakeydabra on the board. Still 0 and clean. Merektha now up for that third phase at 20%. Trying to kill her off here before the round of Sand Encrusted Strikers and Venomous Ophidians come out. Don't want to be dealing with those. That's really the only thing that makes the fight hard. Jay, unfortunately, did not decide to turn around for that Blinding Sand and does get disoriented for the 4 seconds. Back in action now, Merektha sub 10%, while 40k up to catch up and start their second transition.
And of course, the thing to mention here as well is that Abrakeydabra is 3% behind in mob count. I believe they were at the same point here last time in mob count, so we're going to have to see if they're pulling something extra for the rest of the dungeon. I'm not quite sure what that difference in mob count is here.
We'll have a good idea of, the general stat really includes what kind of percentage you're hovering at by the time you're done with Galvazzt. If you're in the high 60s instead of the low 70s, then you're opting to deal with that Storm Caller at the end of the bridge patrol. So Abrakeydabra with the lower percentage of trash probably opting to deal with that as they grab the Nimbus Cloud and move over into the room. Divine Field having popped that Swiftness Potion, runs around, Foot Potion, runs around grabbing all of the Dervishes, Dervidians together and grabbing the Nimbus on top of it. A lot of healing coming out and the Bloodlust as well.
Yeah, we always go over how difficult this Dervioso room is. These do a lot of pulsing AoE damage, and that's why they pop their Bloodlust here. We saw them pop their Bloodlust. We actually saw 40k not use their Bloodlust. We're going to have to see if they do the same thing here in a little bit. But this AoE pulsing damage plus the Tree of Life procced on the side of Abrakeydabra, you can see how difficult it is. Ashline dropping incredibly low. Divine Field also proccing his tank trinket, his cheat death trinket there. So this is incredibly dangerous.
Also, it's not Dervioso, it's Derviosa, by the way, just for future reference. 4 seconds left on the Bloodlust here, and a lot of danger indeed. Ashline no longer has cheat death available for 6 minutes. Divine Field proc the Bon Samedi's Bargain, not available once again for 6 minutes, leading into what is quite a dangerous boss, something that they don't have the availability and buffer of Bloodlust with. And honestly, we saw last time we were commenting on Elsarat's offensive or lack of offensive value on this boss and how sketchy things were getting at the very end of the fight. So we'll see if this is a problem for them without the extra kind of fallback mechanisms that they have. 40k now into the Dervish room as well.
And I think he's already done twice the amount of damage this pull than he did last time they were on this bus. So wonder if he was listening and he's like, you know what? I can actually do damage, guys. I'm showing you right now. Now, we did mention, we kind of glossed over the abilities on this boss last time. We'll get a little bit more in depth. These lightning debuffs do a lot of damage. Now, the reason these players have to soak these lightning spires is because if they hit the boss, they will increase his energy. But Elsarat dying to the quaking debuff.
Oh no, Galvazzt! Elsarat goes down. There is no battle res available on the team as they run out and try to reset the boss without clipping any of the trash on the side. Disaster situation has not been averted for Abrakeydabra, so perhaps you're right. He was listening to us and he shouldn't have been listening to us. Maybe went a bit overboard, ignoring his duties. Tried to take the double spire there, which is what got him so low. Was about to 13, 14 stacks through his second spire, and then the quaking just finished him off. So not a good quaking timing for the team as 40k has properly finished off the 6th Dervish pack without using Bloodlust, once again being able to commit said Bloodlust to Galvazzt, already at 63%.
Yeah, once again, Elsarat interrupting us once again, just like the Quaking did his cast. These Lightning Spires, if they do hit the boss, he'll gain some energy, right? And when that energy hits 100, I mean, God forbid it hits 100, he will explode, doing massive damage to everyone in the group. So pretty much you just want to make sure you're always soaking the Lightning Spires.
Certainly don't want those to inspire the boss at all. Lofist now dipping quite low as well as he's dealt with his version of the Spire. Wolf Disco now getting up to his 9 stacks as Igloo is working to heal everybody up as quickly as possible. A third of the boss's health here is still quite a daunting task, especially when you start to have any issues with mana, which actually Igloo's doing quite well on right now, still at 50%, and still managed to find some time to get into cat form as the Tranquility is finally busted out to once again heal the group up to full. Galvazzt has been re-pulled by Abrakeydabra down to 53% again.
And I mean, we have to mention, the reason we keep bringing up this healer damage is this is a very healing intensive fight. We can see how much damage is going out. So the fact that these players are, or especially Igloo, is able to pump out so much damage while keeping everyone alive, and I mean, both rogues still have their cheat deaths available. We just have to, this is masterful healing out of Igloo.
No, I mean, this is just really, really well done. 8k DPS to kind of cap off the fight here for him, 7.8, 757k on the board. Now, keep in mind, he did have the benefits of Bloodlust at the start, something that Abrakeydabra just does not have to deal with. So Elsarat, as you can see, playing much, much more defensively here, not doing even 1,000 DPS. Got 60k damage on the board, trying to just get a bit of kitty damage in there as much as possible, as Fourty once again rushes down the Lightning Bridge. Wolf Disco, I believe, eats the first melee to the face from the Channeler, just so desperate to get in there, but being below that 70% threshold, they obviously have committed to killing this Channeler.
Right, they're going to kill the Channeler, and the rest of their mob count is going to come from both the orbs going into the skull, which does give a certain percentage of mob count, and the rest of the trash in the dungeon before the final boss.
Before the final boss, 68% here. Channeler is about to fall now. I believe they've calculated their percentage to a perfect queue so that they'd have the luxury of only putting one of the eyes in before they have to put the second one, and that way they don't need to coordinate too much before proccing their 4th reaping. So name of the game here, of course, will be get the eyes into the head as quick as possible. After that happens, they will proc the 4th reaping wave along with all these conscripts and guardians, and they will run as quickly as they can down to the last boss's room and do their shadow meld there. Hopefully they will have some amiable quaking timing on top of that.
And of course that shadow meld will remove combat from both all of these conscripts and guardians the tank is pulling, in addition to all of that trash we mentioned that they're going to skip right before the final boss. And when they get down there, if they pull it off perfectly, they'll just have to deal with 4 of those hexers before they pull the final boss. We do see they did kind of mess up the pull a little bit. One of the guardians was able to snag one of those orbs from them, so they're going to have to finish off that guardian before they have access to that orb again.
Yeah, once that guardian grabs the eye, it is over. You cannot do anything but kill it. You can't stun it. I mean, you can stun it, but he will continue to hold on to the eye. So once again, they go for round 2 here. Disco does unfortunately not get the best of tosses off as it clips one of the conscripts on the side. Elsarat down for the count right now. It looks like he might have died to the Lightning Bridge, and oh, I wish I would have seen what happened there, but unfortunately I looked over, and Elsarat is eating some dirt right now, not the fish that is beside him. They're going to have to wait and see what happens. Perhaps, once again, some DC issues plagued, or it looks like there's a res coming in from Swagfist, excuse me. 40k now has getting ready to dodge the rest of the trash here, has shadow melded at the top of the skip, and then using their not their shadow melds, but their mass stealths, of course, down to the final boss area.
Yeah, it is a little bit dangerous to run all the way to the bottom and shadow meld because there is that trash pack literally right next to the staircase where you would have to drop combat. So it's a kind of a dangerous way of skipping the trash. It is possible, but they probably know that they're slight bit ahead in this dungeon. They don't want to take any risks knowing they have that shroud available, so it's definitely just a smart, safe play from them. We also saw that they delayed their shroud by quite a bit, waiting for that possible quaking cast. I mean, the thing about the quaking cast that we really haven't mentioned ever is that it's on a timer. It can proc every 20 seconds throughout the dungeon, so these players will typically have like a meter on their screen saying, hey, next quaking is in 15, 14, 13 seconds. And when that timer gets to 0, you'll either get a quaking or you won't get a quaking, and it'll be another 20 seconds to the next possible proc.
Fourty playing it safe here and pulling only 2 of these hoodoo hexers at the same time, not wanting to get too many bolsters out for the if they were to pull a set of 4, just because their lava bursts and their flame shock are cast on random members of the group here. A lot of damage could come in, just too much for Igloo to handle, and everybody's definitely getting some of their cooldowns ready for the inevitable pull of the 4th boss. Avatar of Sithralis, as Rantari runs up and starts the RP of the boss. The event has started, and we are in the first of 3 phases where you must kill 4 hoodoo. I keep wanting to say voodoo, but Hoodoo Hexers.
Hoodoo Hexers, I think it's like an alliteration thing, HH. Hulk Hogan, I don't know. Exactly, moving on, you have to deal with all 4 of these Hoodoo Hexers here, and what that will give you access to is the boss, the Avatar of Sethralus. Now, we've mentioned it every single time. This is one of the more interesting bosses. You don't actually kill the boss, you kill the trash around the boss, and that lets you heal the boss. Now, once you've healed the Avatar of Sethralus to full, he thanks you, he gives you a huge buff, and then you just have to deal with the rest of the trash in the dungeon.
The rest of the trash, and that shouldn't be too much danger either, because the players will have that well, essentially, actually, it is a debuff, but nonetheless, it buffs your character with 90% reduced damage taken, 50% haste, 50% healing. But, you know, with all the increased heart strike stacks that come from the Guardians at the end, plus any mismanagement with the bolster, even through that debuff, we've actually seen tanks get hit quite hard, so we'll have to manage that well at the end. Here comes the Tree of Life, though, as 40k's healer, Igloo, is getting ready to just pump as much as he can, conserving the mana simultaneously through the tree form, and just pump all of those regrowths into the Avatar of Sethralus to hit that 70% check mark as quickly as possible.
Even popping that Tranquility to get the boss up faster, applying that healing over time to the boss, instantly getting it to 70%, and once the boss gets to 70%, we start the second phase, where they'll pretty much have to do the exact same thing. Kill all 4 Hoodoo Hexers, deal with one of the Heart Guardians, and also deal with those several Plague Doctor spawns that spawn throughout the phase.
Not the same thing, no ways ironic. I don't believe it, but you are indeed right. Never wrong here, as the Hoodoo Hexers get clipped over on the side. 3 are about to fall. Now, doing really well here. Now, we do have those Plague Toads that come in, and those will actually chase a player. Once they connect with the player, they will do an AoE explosion of nature damage, applying a damage over time to you, plus a healing reduction of 50%. So you want somebody to run around grabbing those diseases, and then Lae'zel will have the ability to dispel that off.
Right, and of course those Plague Frogs will fixate their threat targets, so typically what players will do is they'll spread out around the room and not stand close to their healer, so they don't splash that AoE debuff, that healing debuff onto their healer, which of course is incredibly important in this fight because you have to heal the boss to get to the next phase.
That is correct, as Avatar of Sethralus finally is able to be healed again at 70%. We can see a well-timed orb proc there. Now, that orb falls from the Guardian that spawns the tank mob. Once you click that orb, it will bolster and supply some extra healing to the Avatar of Sethralus, allowing you to get through this transition phase just a bit faster. Not too far behind, though. Abrakeydabra find themselves in the second phase where 40k just finished up. They will have their Bloodlust become available to them a bit faster, but this time have still a 3-death differential, 15 seconds that they need to overcome as the final phase starts here for 40k. They're getting their buffs. You can see them on their character frames right now, and Igloo runs off right away to grab the remaining trash.
And once again, we've mentioned this many, many times. Pretty much once you have this buff, it's not a matter of are you going to die? It's how long is it going to take you to finish off the rest of this trash? This buff is massive. It's a damage buff, it's a haste buff, it's a damage taken buff. You don't take, it's impossible to die when you have this buff, so pretty much all they're doing is they're trying to efficiently AoE cleave everything down as much as possible. The only kind of nuance here is they want to try to make sure that they have one of those Hoodoo Hexers up at the end so they can keep this buff throughout the rest of the encounter, because once the boss is over, you lose that buff.
Yeah, you certainly don't want that. There's already 7 stacks of that Heart Strike on Rentari. We can see it. That's, if I'm not mistaken, 140% increased damage taken, as it's usually 20% per stack. 8 stacks now, so you can see how things can get pretty out of hand quickly, regardless of the 90% damage reduction on the tank. 9 stacks now, on top of if there's any mishandling of bolster, but it seems like that will not be the case here today, as the final Heart Guardians being pulled around with that last Plague Doctor. Team heads over to the final Hexer, and they will be finishing up the dungeon once again in a fairly commanding lead that they were on their way to doing in the first map. So the best team wins once again in terms of strat and performance here.
Very well-deserved victory here by 40k, taking Temple of Sethralus from Abrakeydabra here. And as Sowers, you mentioned before, these are also the time trial dungeons that we had to be going through here. One that Abrakeydabra was #1 on. So the fact that 40k is taking it, they were more consistent, they were more clean on this one, really bodes well for the next matchup here in Motherlode.
Yeah, it was a really good manner throw from Abrakeydabra in this dungeon. They had a couple of mistakes that you really just can't have. The Elsarat death, plural, Elsarat deaths were not very good, so he ended up dying here on Galvazzt to the Quake. He's at just a low health, gets quaked, and they've got to reset the boss. He gets thrown out of the room, and this allows 40k to just pull ahead into a convincing lead. And they got a nice lead, and then Abrakeydabra threw them another bone just a second later, as a matter of fact, after the eyeball gauntlet, where Elsarat's doing his best to run through the orb. He gets quaked, he runs into the balls, and then he runs out, he runs into some more balls, and then, he just gets to sit there and think about what he's done with a nice plate of fish next to him. That's a noof.
A very big oof indeed there, Sours. Thank you for that. And as we move on to Motherlode there, we have the Tyrannical teaming once again here, Sloot. Seen some of the teams moving throughout this entire dungeon, actually getting a little bit of trash percentage from everywhere here. What do you think about a lot of the teams who've been pulling into the R&D wing?
Yeah, I mean, they have been. It's curious to see because in the first weeks for both East and West that we saw, most of them were just kind of dealing with 90-ish% of the trash before the first boss. And now we're seeing a shift towards, let's grab as many of the Peacekeepers as we can, deal with as minimal trash as we can while still maintaining up to the 4th Reaping, if I'm not mistaken, even 3rd Reaping from some of the packs before they deal with the coin-operated crowd Pummel-er. And then they deal with a bunch of trash up to the second boss. And, you know, maybe the R&D wing, Jack, like you're saying, you mention it, we all mention it all the time, it's super dangerous. We're all scared of it, but the couple times we've seen teams go into it, it really hasn't been that bad. They just kind of stomp through it and then skip the remaining half of the R&D wing and with their shadow meld from the Night Elves, and it's not been so bad. So perhaps a tendency to go in that direction now.
Yeah, we'll have to be seeing it on the other side of this break. But give us 1 minute. We'll be right back with Motherlode between Abrakeydabra and 40K. 40K up 1-0 over Abrakeydabra as we move on to Game 2 in this time trial-oriented series here. I'm Jack, and joining me on the desk right now is Sours, Azerokk, and Sloot here. Moving on to the Motherlode. We've seen a lot of teams going through this Sours. We've seen a lot of Peacekeepers coming up into play, but overall, the Masterminds have proven to not be too difficult in that R&D wing to clear up just a little bit of the last bit of trash.
Yeah, it's definitely something that you don't really think about a lot in dungeons is that running backwards is actually the worst possible thing that you can do. You should really just be trying to run forwards as much as possible.
Good advice.
You know, it's much faster to do that. So being able to just run through the first half more linearly and then do some of those mobs in the R&D ring is very efficient for just movement's sake.
And I think in many ways, since teaming will increase the amount of trash that you have to end up doing, people start following most of their own route, and by the time that they get to Azerokk, they're at 80-85% or something like that on teaming, but they're almost done when they're not on teaming. So at that point, they're just looking at, well, we got to keep on moving forward. Let's try to take out some of the things here. And even we've seen some of like the weapons testers, for example, is ironic, where they kind of match up pretty similarly to like the hired assassins, that if you have enough stuns, gouges, things like that to get the interrupts onto them, they're really not too much of a threat.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we've talked about the research and development wing a lot here. It's one of those weird parts of the dungeon where I think a lot of people were instantly turned off by that section of the dungeon because of how much single target CC you needed to deal with all the trash. And because people were so used to the Legion style of just mass AoEing things down, and they didn't have that available, they're just like, you know what, we're not going to do that section of the dungeon anymore.
Oh, let's dive right into it. Abrakeydabra needs this one to stay in the tournament here. 40K has been stepping up today. Let's see if they're going to be able to seal this one out on Motherlode.
I'm going to be really curious here, Zyra, to see what, well, I mean, just how these pulls kind of muster up. A lot of the times we see teams even mass stealth past this beginning part into the HUD, especially at least during the explosive week, but not shying to it at all. Abrakeydabra just grabbing a mass pull here right in the middle. Leg sweep comes out. We can see the Peacekeeper formed on the side, but no bloodlust from either team yet as they get an equally sizable pull here. Charged claws coming up from the Peacekeepers. A lot of tank damage coming up.
Yeah, this is completely different from what we've seen from any other team, and we see Divine Field dropping incredibly low, 1% health on him there, but didn't even proc his Cheat Death Trinket if he has that equipped just yet, but he's still taking a massive amount of damage here.
Yeah, I mean, this is really dangerous. You can already see the sack pad coming out of Ashine. Now, both Unholy DKs have been busted out on the two sides. If you think about a trash-rich dungeon, and then on top of it, add teaming, the thing that first comes to your mind is the Motherlode, and that is prime time for these Unholy DKs to shine with the amount of damage that they can output with burst AoE. So going to probably be seeing some big numbers coming out of the first Reaping wave here as both teams stealth through and rear up to grab said pack. Now, well and accurately placed Ring of Peace there on purpose in order to make sure that the appropriate mech jockeys get to the non-active mechanized Peacekeepers on the side so that they can activate more of them.
Yeah, and definitely not surprised to see that Bloodlust pop for Team 40K, and probably eventually for Team Abrakeydabra here. This is the usual first pull that most teams do. They'll do this quad mechanized key Peacekeeper pull at the start of the dungeon with their Bloodlust, but we still have yet to see the Bloodlust pop from Abrakeydabra, so we'll have to see what they plan on doing with that later on in the dungeon. But these look like pretty similar trash pulls from them.
Similar. I think they only grabbed 3 Peacekeepers here, if I'm not mistaken, so perhaps just wasn't enough for them, but I mean, they don't want to delay it too long. They want to make sure that they get an appropriate amount of Bloodlust in throughout this dungeon. 40K, 3 seconds left on on their Bloodlust, working to finish off these thugs right here as they will proc their first Reaping Wave. We'll see exactly what they choose to combine it with. Now, we've mentioned it before, teaming here means there's more trash present in the dungeon and more trash that you need to kill to reach your percentages. We do have that ever so dangerous Grievous affix too, so below 90% you will be accruing a higher and higher stacking dot up to 4 until you're healed back above 90%. But Zyra, let's talk about the trash here for a second. It's not really only for the tank that there's a lot of danger, but residual damage on the group in the form of the thugs, the grease gun coming out of the mech jockey, you have the ice spritzer going out as well.
Yeah, there's just so many mechanics to deal with. I think the most dangerous of all of those mechanics is going to be that Ice Spritzer cast from the refreshment vendors. It'll target a random player in the group, channel this Ice Spritzer ability on that player, doing in its own right a massive amount of damage, but should that channel finish, it'll freeze the person in place for about 5 seconds. Now this is dispellable, but you kind of need to save those dispels for your tank whenever Reaping is procced.
A lot of poison damage on Divine Field as he drops to 1% health. He has procced his Bonsomni's Bargain Trinket. We can see that small absorb finally getting healed off there from Elsarat, but a lot of danger coming in for the Divine Field as just they still have a bunch more pulls to go before the next boss, so we won't have that available for 6 seconds, but those poison stacks come from Toxic Blade casts from the Assassin, so somebody failed to get an interrupt there, or they just did not have enough available, adding a ton of extra nature damage to their active target. 40k still dealing with their own pulls here as 2 Peacekeepers are grabbed on top of a smaller trash pack, getting ready to proc their 40% Reaping Wave.
Yeah, and I think something we kind of glossed over, I think I was droning on about research and development whenever it popped up on our screen. Both of these teams have opted to swap to the Unholy DK, which is not that surprising in this teeming dungeon affix, especially in this trash-rich Motherlode dungeon. They both swapped to these Unholy DK just for their massive AoE damage potential. They're pulling so much trash. In addition to that, they're also pulling Reaping on top of even more trash just to take full advantage of that Unholy DK exponential AoE damage.
Yeah, we're going to see here in just a moment the 40% Reaping Wave actually on both sides as Abrakeydabra sits at 38 and 40k just surpasses it. They get 44% on the board, grab a couple of thugs, a lot of thugs, 3 thugs on the side. Got to be careful with their Inhale Vapors cast. It will increase their damage output by 50%. Not only dangerous for the tank here, but these are the mobs that charge off to one of the distant targets and do a fair bit of damage, so Igloo wary of that, getting not too far from the pack as they wait for their second Reaping Wave to join the pack. Abrakeydabra 43% on the board, big pull coming out and leg sweep on top of those Risen Souls to try and control some of the stack gain on top of Divine Field.
And like we mentioned, that massive Unholy DK damage doing more than double anyone else in the group, probably doing about 50% of the overall damage of the group, which is pretty impressive just for 1 DPS, but that's that power of the Unholy DK. It's that massive AoE exponential damage once again. That's why they're pulling those Reaping packs into more trash packs.
And just a bit of slop coming out of here from Abrakedabra's Dr. J as he gets clipped by one of the green swirlies that come out of the Lost Souls when they die. If you get hit by that, you will incur a 30-second debuff that decreases your healing and damage done by 10%, so not what you want to be having in a DPS race of trash pulling right now. Divine Field just having a lot of struggles getting out of that 4 stack of Grievous. Finally, Elsarat manages to heal him up, only to see him dip right back down below 90. Dr. J hovering in that 50% area as well, having his own troubles with the 4 stack of Grievous. A lot of issues coming out here just by avoidable damage and the group getting hit by said avoidable damage, making Elsarat's life just not very fun right now. 40k moving in a more stable, let's say, manner over on the right side at 51% trash and triple Peacekeeper.
Yeah, in those situations where you see multiple people underneath that Grievous barrier, it kind of means you're not dealing with the trash. And the problem with this trash is that all of it requires so much CC, and you only have so much of it in your group, right? And the important thing to remember is only running one of those rogues, so they only have one character that can both interrupt and stun pretty occasionally. Their only other options are maybe a clutch grip from the DK or a ring of peace or leg sweep from the monk, so they don't have that much single target CC. So some of these abilities are starting to leak through and do extra damage to some of the players in the group, that extra chip damage that you were mentioning.
Yeah, and even right there we saw one of the Flechette's Cat's Gift, its very first takeoff, and poison was applied to the group. That shouldn't be there in the first place because, once again, somebody did not interrupt the Toxic Blades on the Assassin. Now, it could be a calculated lack of interrupt. They might just be divvying up their limited interrupts elsewhere, or somebody just may have easily missed it. Nonetheless, Abrakeydabra now has procced their third Reaping Wave at 66%, and 40k follows suit with their third round of Reaping, pulling it amongst trash. Now, Zara, it seems that we're kind of seeing a more traditional route to Motherlode so far, just dealing with as much of the trash in the first area as possible, expecting to see maybe the 80% Reaping Wave on top of the first boss.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at these routes, I think the only team that really kind of changed their route for this tournament has to be that Method E. When we go look at the time trial leaderboards, they were almost a full 2 minutes ahead of every other team, so it was clear that they knew something or had a different strat in this dungeon compared to everyone else. So it's not surprising to see them have a completely separate strategy from what the more traditional strategy is on the side of these teams. Abrakeydabra having almost a disaster scenario. These guys are still dropping down to poison incredibly quick. Dr. J proccing his cheat death. Ashine going down to that debuff, and that's one of those things we talked about. One of those hired assassins got their Toxic Blade debuff off. They didn't have a chance to interrupt it, and then he also got his Hail of Fletchets cast off, which every single time that Hail of Fletchet does damage, it applies a stack of that Toxic Blade debuff to everyone in the group, and I believe they had 3 or 4 of those stacks of the debuff on everyone, and this is 2 deaths. It's probably going to be 3. They can keep going. It's going to be a full team wipe.
Oh, the irony of it all. I mean, we just talked about that. They didn't interrupt Toxic Blades. Flechettes was not interrupted. 4 stacks of poison damage over time on everybody, ramping into Grievous. 4 stacks of Grievous, way too much to heal, and that is going to be all she wrote for now for Abrakeydabra, as they have a full team wipe, need to recover, get right back into it. Dr. J has pulled something somewhere as he drops a significant amount of HP down and re-procs that cheat death. Might be trying to keep the pull alive in the corner, but we can see Jay now finally getting healed by Elserat. But let's focus here on Fourty, who has procced their 4th Reaping Wave perfectly at 81%, moving over into, I believe we'll be moving into crowd operated Pummel-er's room. Yes, so they're going to pull the first boss with that Reaping Wave coming in. Actually, I don't even know if they're going to do the Reaping Wave. It looks like they just kind of shadow melded it off.
It looked like they were bringing a piece just to give themselves a little bit of extra time to shadow meld as much as they could. No, unfortunately, a couple of those mobs did leak through. But the thing to remember about Reaping that we kind of don't mention too often is that it has a massive aggro radius. We're talking 30, 40 yards. So if they see you, if they pretty much catch a glimpse of you, they're going to come running. And that's what we saw with this Lost Soul here. It's an extra thing. We do see them actually getting hit by this frontal static slam ability. It's kind of weird that they get hit by that. It's a pretty telegraphed mechanic.
Yeah, I mean, that, and I mean, you're talking one thing. I'm looking at Abrakeydabra. Again, they didn't enter with Flechettes. 2 stacks of poison out on everyone. No deaths, but Ashine getting really low again as he had the Ice Spritzer ticking on him. Barely able to get out of that 4-stack Grievous. Lot of issues over there as we finally get the sack pet there and everything he can to stay alive, helping out with some death strikes and stabilizes. Fourty here, getting those foot bombs into the boss, making sure that you get that stacking 50% damage increase taken on the boss. Now, trick here really is to get those first 2 bombs in as quickly as possible, followed by waiting on the 3rd one just as long as you can so you can refresh the buff and get it up to 150% damage taken to maximize DPS efficiency. Sometimes, unfortunately, you are forced to kind of get all 3 in at once, depending on what combination of Static Shock is coming that will punt you back, or, of course, the Coin Absorb on the ground.
And, of course, should you fail to kick any of those bombs into the boss, they will instead explode on your group, giving your entire group that 50% damage taken debuff, which together with the Static Shock AoE ability from the boss, you could get pretty low, and that's pretty scary in this Grievous environment.
Yeah, no, and Grievous can just snowball so easily in here, and it really makes the healer's life quite tough, especially when they're trying to divvy a lot of their healing onto that tank who's just pulling so much trash right now. Nonetheless, Pummel-er finally pulled here by Abrakeydabra. We see the Bloodlust come out in conjunction with that first round of debuffs from the soccer bombs, the foot bombs really, and finally 30% here for Fourty. Now, both teams pretty well off on trash, but again, we're going to talk about it a million times. By the end of the dungeon, 6 deaths on the board for Abrakeydabra, 30 seconds to overcome.
And on top of that, they're pretty far behind in terms of boss. This 30% in this tyrannical environment is a pretty significant margin to go through, especially considering that this boss takes a lot of damage and has a lot of health. So we're going to have to see perfect usage of that foot bomb out of these teams. Now, they are both from the EU, so I'm pretty sure they're both pretty well versed in football, so I don't expect them to miss any of these foot bombs.
That's right, they have to use their foot instead of their hand, so we're not playing hand egg here today, Zyro. 40% on the Pummel-er for Abrakeydabra, whilst single-digit percent for Fourty. They get their final round of foot bombs into the boss, getting ready to just burn out the rest of it. 19% trash left for them, so there's probably going to be a combination of getting to that mid to high 90s, more traditional routing, as we've seen from most of the teams in Motherlode, and then dealing with Azerokk. And towards the end of Azerokk's life, grabbing something to proc that final Reaping, and then just kind of home running it to the 3rd boss and make to Flux Flame, and making sure that you drop that Shadow Meld, and which will just get rid of any aggro on that 5th Reaping Wave.
Yeah, this is a massive pull coming out from Team Fourty here. This is incredibly dangerous. All of these Earth Ragers in this pack have a dangerous ability called Rock Lance, which is a single target casted nuke ability that can be interrupted, but considering how many of these Earthshapers there are in this pack, I don't believe they can get all of the interrupts if they wanted to.
No, and they're doing some really good jobs right there. We do see one go off on Rentari right now. Just so much damage coming in, and including that dot damage, and I believe it leaves a healing reduction on you, or at least once upon a time it did. I'll have to double check the fact on that one, but a lot of damage coming in on Rentari as one leak there. 3 more rock lances being cast right now as 2 of them connect with Rentari just at the very end. Managed to keep him alive. A lot of healing and support needed from Igloo, and he does proc his Bwansamdi trinket, so a bit of sloppiness, unfortunately, at the end costs that cheat death cooldown to proc for the next 6 minutes now. I mean, you were just saying how dangerous those are, and they were. They did really well with the first hit. They Typhoon comboed into an Ursul's Vortex to deal with the first round of 3, but after that, just too many went off.
Yeah, but, you know, I mean, I think I'd take a cheat death over a death in this dungeon any day, just even though he doesn't have it available for 6 minutes. That's why you wear the trinket. That's perfect there. Now, they do have the exact right amount of trash percentage in order to, like you mentioned, pull that trash back into the boss. But looking at Azerokk here, these Earth Ragers are probably one of the more dangerous mechanics, and they actually got one of the worst fixate configurations they possibly could for this boss.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, and Earth Rage is just very dangerous in this comp as well. They fixate a random player. You can't get double fixated. You see just how bad the bleed is on Lofus right now. 6 stacks, opting to just get away from it. Now, when one of these Earth Ragers gets enraged, essentially, and grows bright blue and grows in size, it will take a substantial amount of increased damage, but also deal increased damage. So very important for players to get away from that while the supporting rest of the party cleaves that down. Lae'zel just now getting healed back above that 4 stack of Grievous. And now we're in kind of essentially, Zyro, snooze fest on this boss.
Yeah, once those Earth Ragers go down, especially in this Grievous affix, that extra bleed damage, which will proc the Grievous damage, making even more bleed damage, that just proves how dangerous that section of the fight is. We saw them all getting incredibly low. But like you mentioned, once those Earth Ragers are dead, you kind of just patchwork the boss down. He'll spawn one Earth Rager every now and then, but just that one fixate, that one player will just have to run around in circles while his teammates cleave it down. There's not much going on. Typically what we'll see from these teams is once they've dealt with this one Earth Rager, they'll then pull the Taskmaster in and cleave everything down.
Yeah, that's the kind of efficiency you look for from the teams here. I mean, this one Earth Rager, you can kind of see Wolf run around in circles, wanting to not get too many stacks on him, while the rest of the team supports with things like Typhoon, Leg Sweep, whatever they can to kind of keep the mob away, but allow Wolf to still effectively DPS the boss. Soon enough, we're going to be seeing that trash pull likely come out of Forty to sync the boss's death along with proccing their 5th Reaping Wave, so they can make a coordinated run down to the 3rd boss's room, Ricke's Flux Flame. We'll see how that turns out for them. Not far behind at this point, though. Abrakeydabra now at 60% on Azerokk, has also entered that kind of second, more mellow phase, waiting to pull their trash too. They're only 2% ahead on trash, but it looks like they'll be doing some similar pulls here.
Yeah, and that 2% ahead on trash doesn't really do much for them, because if I'm not mistaken, this whole Taskmaster thing we first saw from their team, and we know that gives about 7% trash, so they're a little bit not perfect on their calculation for trash percentage, but that didn't seem to affect them too much. They are catching up just a little bit on that boss percentage. We saw they were 30% behind before. Now they're about 25% behind as Forty starts to focus more on cleaving this trash down. So we'll have to see which one of these teams can sort of cleave this more efficiently down and get the skip relatively clean.
But as promised, I will mention it again, there are 6 deaths on the board in favor of Forty, so 30 seconds extra that Abrakeydabra will need to overcome, not to mention they're already slightly behind on the dungeon. Forty quite masterfully dealing with the rest of the trash on top of Azerokk here. 98% on the board. Azerokk will fall just as the Taskmaster Ascari is about to be killed here. They'll take their little minecart ride down to the R&D wing that Jack ever so lovingly mentions every time, and they will get ready to shadow meld that aggro off. Everybody down, actually they're not going in the cart. They use the momentary time out of combat when proccing Reaping to mount up, and they opt to just go down the side of the cliff there instead of using the cart.
Yeah, that's actually a completely interesting route. I don't think we've seen anyone do that on broadcast before. Instead of taking the cart path, they opt to just go completely around that minefield, and nobody gets hit by a bomb. That's very impressive. I don't think we've seen that from anyone before. But like we mentioned, they're going to go to the far end of this boss room. They're going to proc their Shadow Meld, which will skip all of the R&D trash that they pulled, and they'll only have to deal with just that one Risen Soul that leaked through.
Yeah, so I mean, their aggro radius is just so big, and at this point, they've just succumbed to the fact that we got to kill this Risen Soul. We're not getting away from it. Not too much damage. A couple of Lost Souls leak as well, but not going to deter them from starting on the boss. Ricke's Flux Flame on Tyrannical. Very, very dangerous boss in terms of damage output. Mechanically pretty sound. She will drop these kind of Azerite goop puddles on the ground at a player's location, and after she drops 2, she will will start her propellant blast in the direction of one of the players. You want to make sure you aim that blast towards the pool so they can clean off the platform. But Zyro, first of all, she casts pure fire damage at the tank, not blockable, just huge amounts of incoming damage. Want to get those ignore pain spam as often as possible, but she also has the chemical burns.
Yeah, the chemical burn is obviously like the more dangerous section of the fight here. She'll target both the tank and the closest player to the boss with this nasty, once again, fire damage debuff that will deal a lot of damage. You can see how much damage it's ticking on the players that goes on here every single time it goes out. And they don't really have that. They have a pretty solid DPS comp for it. Their monk can touch a karma, their DK can use their AMS, and should it go on the rogue like it does here, he can just cloak it off, use that magic immunity. So we did instantly see it go away on the side of Wolf Disco. They have a pretty solid comp for dealing with that debuff.
Abrakeydabra doing well to get through the minefield there, as well as they get down into Ricke Flux Flame's room, drop their aggro on their respective 5th Reaping Wave, and just get to town on her. 40k, of course, well ahead at this point, about 30% extra health down from them, 50% now for Ricke. And yeah, well, as you mentioned, Zara, they have enough defensive tools rotational here so that the two closest members to Ricke are either a tank dealing with it, with either Spell Reflect or just, well, their tankiness, or of course a rotation of Anti-Magic Shell. You have Cloak of Shadows from the Rogue, a lot that can be helped out for the healer, because we saw Lizelle get it at the beginning of the fight, and one of those ticks is about 25% of your max health.
Right, and we also the monks can also remove it with diffuse magic, so they just have a ton of tools to remove or deal with that damage. And as well as, you know, you just see the massive damage from the Windwalker monk. A lot of that has to deal with a touch of karma. They just get a free several 100,000 worth of damage for free from that. So I mean, we see them actually pretty masterfully dealing with this area of denial, which is of course the main portion of the boss fight, making sure they don't run out of room to walk around and making sure they're blasting all of those extra goo puddles off of the platform.
Now, it's important to note right now that we're at 4:15 left on Bloodlust for 40k. If they get it back up, it'll be pretty late into the final boss fight with Razgo, but I'm not sure. They'll either get it at the last phase or maybe even in the transition phase, but that's quite a ways off. The boss is about to fall here, and so a bit of advantage here for Abrakeydabra as they only have 64 seconds left on theirs, so they'll kind of have the option and luxury to use that whenever they want. Nonetheless, 40k has downed the third boss, Ricke, and will be getting ready to stealth through the rest of this trash, which they won't pull at all, and if they do, well, they have to pull some. There's some True Sight in there. They will just get ready to Shadow Meld it at the end.
Yeah, of course, we'll just see a pretty typical Shroud up to the final pack. We see that boss surrounded by some of those the little jetpack goblins. I don't know what they're called off the top of my head, but those do have True Sight, like you mentioned. They'll have to use their Shadow Meld to get past that trash. And I mean, we've gone over this Bloodlust timing a lot of times before. I can't remember how many times we've said, oh, they might not get their Bloodlust up, but I think every single time we've mentioned that, it's come up like in the last 30 or 40% of the boss. So it's probably going to come up for them right at the end of the fight, but we'll just have to see.
Mogul Razdunk about to be pulled here by 40k as they well dodge the little jetpack goblin dudes, as deemed here by Ironic. Now, you know, I always say this is more of a 3x3 grid, but really, Jack pointed out to me, it's more of a 3x2 grid, certainly wider than it is tall, so they have to make sure with those Boomba bots going on the side that will cover one column and row of said grid, as we see here, that the team effectively moves it to a spot and they have where you can rotate around the boss because of his large hitbox and not have to move the boss too frequently. Now, if you mismanage the pull or mismanage the positioning, you do have to get ready to pre-move the boss well ahead of time, because it is a very, very stubborn boss, often cast. So if you don't get in position ahead of time by paying attention to where those Boomba bots go out, it will get you in trouble.
Yeah, and of course, the more dangerous parts of the fight is what we just saw right there. We see Igloo going down to it. That Gatling gun where you have to move around a boss. You have to dodge the Gatling gun. But then there's also those bombs going off at the same time, and we saw him go down to that exact combo there. Fortunately, they are running with an Unholy DK who's able to battle res him up quickly. Now, in that double Rogue Windwalker monk comp, you can't do that. So good on them there for having that comp in this dungeon. It would have been pretty unfortunate if they didn't have a battle res there.
That would have been disastrous. That would have been pretty much the end of their dungeon run right there. Now, we have to mention as well the homing missile, which oftentimes will go out on a ranged target. In this case, really the only target that's viable will be that Resto Druid. They have to run that homing missile out as anybody that is within that orange radius when it explodes will incur a pretty heavy dot. So something the healer doesn't want to have to deal with whilst all the other damage and a pretty heavy melee damage coming in on the tank goes out. 50% here for Mogul as it starts to enter his transition phase. During this transition phase, we do see often teams pop their Bloodlust. They don't have this available to them, but yet they have to deal with two of these Goblin jetpack dudes.
Yep, the 2 Goblin Jetpack dudes. You know, in my defense, nobody pulls this trash in the dungeon, so I don't really remember what their names are.
It is part of this boss, just saying.
True, it is part of this boss. These Sky Scorchers do have an interesting ability, this Azerite Heartseeker, where they'll target a player, and you can soak this damage by splitting the damage by standing inside that red line. Of course, the main mechanic we're looking for in this intermission is that Stomp, that Drill Smash. He'll target one of the players. You see the arrow over their head right there on Igloo, and once the boss finishes the Drill Smash, guys, he'll go to that position, stomp down, and you want him to get him to stomp all 3 of these little oil cans. Once those oil cans are stomped, he goes back to the first phase.
Those are oil cans? I thought they were like little pillars or something. But nonetheless, of course, they've fixed that issue as well that we knew earlier with all of the pets down on the side. Those don't count anymore. So all 3 do need to be stomped before the boss is able to break out, who does so right now, 45%. Now, once you get past this transition, you're just back in phase 1 again. The exact same phase that we saw from 100 to 50. Bloodlust will be coming up in 32 seconds for 40k, whilst Abrakeydabra just clawing their way back, trying to get through this transition phase, and they still have their Bloodlust available as well. I like to see these teams, well, involuntarily on 40k's side, but holding on to their Bloodlust. A lot of the time, I don't feel like they need them during the transition, because they end up killing the Sky Scorcher so quickly and then just sitting there on a boss that is mostly immune to damage, doing nothing for 15 seconds of Bloodlust.
I mean, it's sort of a safety thing, right, with those 2 little Goblin Jetpack dudes. There's a lot of AoE damage going out on the group in addition to the AoE damage done by the Drill Smash that goes on in the group. So it's just kind of a safety thing. They're making sure they're staying alive for the healing. But we do see the Bloodlust does come up for 40k when the boss is at 20% health. They'll probably have that up until the end of the fight. And of course, once the Mimiron's head sort of version of Mogul Resonant goes down, the Goblin himself will pop up and they'll just finish him off for the end of the dungeon.
Yeah, not a lot of health there as Mogul is being finished off by 40k here, and a rather turnaround performance here from 40k as they Raz dunk all over Abrakeydabra with a 2-0 sweep, even having to replay that first dungeon, which they were definitely in line to win. So 40k dominates here and moves on in the lower bracket.
40k smashes Abrakeydabra, who really just did not look like the team that we've come to know them by at this point here. 40k, the 4th seed, beating the number 2 seed in this tournament. And 40k not only was number 4 seed at the start of this tournament, but they ended up in 7th, 8th place the last tournament that we saw them. So the growth that we've seen from them today has been absolutely phenomenal, and they are knocking out Abrakeydabra. And 40k moves on to go up against Mythic NA on this one, Sours.
Yeah, unfortunately, Abrakeydabra just got iced early in the dungeon. As Shine went down to that iced spritzer in the beginning, and when you die as a Death Knight, you see his damage has sort of only just begun to take off. All these mobs have so much health, and the entire team just ends up going down without that extra damage. This pool's perhaps a little bit overzealous out of Abrakeydabra. They couldn't quite handle the pressure, and they all kind of started falling over one at a time. And this is sort of the story of Abrakeydabra, the previous dungeon as well as this dungeon, where they just couldn't quite handle it. But 40k looking cool, calm, and collected with their beautiful movement throughout the entire dungeon. Some big pulls, and look at this, 0 deaths up into this point. Flawless execution.
And really, what was going on with Abrakeydabra here is ironic. It seemed like they were a team that we had slated to be stacking up against Mythic NA, maybe being a pretty close competitor to Mythic EU, and right here they definitely didn't play like it.
Yeah, no, I mean, we kind of established the narrative the first cup, where they were this super successful team. They were super dominant. They only really made one mistake all tournament long, but maybe it was the jump to 19 that kind of threw them off. I can't really think of anything else because we've seen a completely different team from them this week.
At some points, it kind of seemed like they've lost a little bit of their healer polish, where they've been trying to mix in maybe a little bit more damage here, and then they can play too aggressively, and then they start wiping here, Sours. And what was the big moment here in that Motherlode?
Oh, this is a big aggressive, but it's working out for 40k. The huge Giga pull out of Rentari, where this is the kind of pull that in the past you really only see this kind of stuff happening with a Death Knight with Gorfien's Grasp. But the power of the Resto Druid, he's able to drop a Typhoon and a Vortex, and you see he knocks all those mobs back, and then the Druid is the Death Knight equivalent in this, stacks all these mobs up beautifully for Lothus, and it's the same thing that we saw a lot of teams doing in the Waycrest Manor, where there's good head on these DPS players to kind of hold off on their damage for a little bit, to let these mobs get stacked up so that they can get maximum efficiency on their cooldowns and kill all these mobs at once. As you saw, a lot of these rock lances start to get off when these mobs are at low health, but they pull it off.
It's an incredible performance that they did there, and as you're seeing here in the lower final, Mythic NA and 40k are vying in that lower final spot to get into the grand finals. Mythic NA really wants to get that rematch against Mythic EU on this one here, Sloot.
Oof.